Good evening, everyone. System Chalk here with the 11th episode, I believe, of Book of Hours, our first run on YouTube. And I will just get it out of the way at the start. Say I'm playing a copy that was given to me by Weather Factory for promotional purposes. So buy one for yourself, buy one for your friends, and then buy a backup copy just in case you lose your Steam account. No. Obviously, it's a thing of value that I've been given for the purposes of promoting it. I think my enthusiasm for the game has probably been revealed by the fact that I've gone 10 minutes over in 2 episodes now, sort of having these great dilemmas which really only have any relation to sort of the world of this game. These are not really practical considerations as far as mechanics are concerned, and yet for me this is such a big part of playing the game. But with that in mind, I'm a little conscious of the fact that the playthrough, so this is inevitably going to happen. I know a lot of people really embraced this playthrough at the start as a way of learning how to play the game, which I think is wonderful. And this certainly isn't a comprehensive look at how to play the game. I am introducing concepts as they are useful to me. So for instance, there are more powerful hirelings that we could be using that that I haven't used yet. And I mean, I think I have good reasons for not doing it, but obviously people feel differently and those people are wrong. But the fact of the matter is that past a certain point, this is going to be a little bit more about my engagement with this game. And it's going to be less useful in terms of people deciding how to play the game, because in the end, they're going to want to go down their own path. But this is, I suspect, while it was never intended to be sort of an educational series, it's nice if it does do that. But the hope here is to sort of capture sort of a somewhat early run. I mean, this did start when I had my first access to the full version of the game that was a release candidate as opposed to a beta. And to a certain extent, I think, you would hope that people who maybe were on the fence about whether or not this game was for them, who get motivated to play the game, the hope is that maybe they take a few things from what you do and then sort of decide, okay, I want to author my own playthrough and sort of move on. And that's kind of the right way. It's a little bit like if you're TAing someone, right? You don't want them to only hit the limits of your own knowledge. You want them to advance and flourish. So that, I think, is inevitable. But there is the dilemma that some people are going to be interested in terms of lore discussion, and some people just want to see the game move forward. And lately, it's been slower in terms of getting the days done. So I can't promise that we'll be pushing ahead too much faster, but I do have a few clear ideas in terms of what the next few steps are going to be. So the first step, of course, is to unpause. In terms of lining up the day, so we don't have any memories that we need to commit. My outside option is always to read the Perugian Diaries, given that we can get a storm from what does not bark. Oop. An event. All right, and I believe we will actually be able to satisfy people's moons. Also, I really like this song. I can finally name... Okay, Subtle Old Soldier. And it is the first day of winter. The affair of the forgivable debt, like many criminal enterprises, reckoners offer loans to the desperate and unwary, but reckoners can offer loans not only of cash, but of allotted years of life. They usually keep a low profile, but now 2 reckoner mobs have gone to war in the unremarkable Lithuanian city of Kaunas. Why? What's in Kaunas? So, for those of you who may have just been introduced to this world through Book of Hours, for Cultist Simulator, there are the main DLC. So there's Cultist Simulator, and then there are the Dancer, the Priest, and the Ghoul DLC. But there was one last one that was made. I actually don't think that was originally intended, but honestly, it was one of the best things Weather Factory's done. Of course, Book of Hours is just so huge and beautiful that, it's really hard. It's almost like trying to pick a favorite kid. I don't have kids, but I'm assuming that parents, secretly all have their favorites and they just never admit it. But Exile was basically like Cultist Simulator 1.5. It's a really, really impressive DLC. And that one deals a lot with the idea of reckoners. I think it's probably better if you discover it on your own, but essentially the idea here is that you have had enough in terms of your involvement with reckoners. You've stolen the years from them, and you're on the run, and you need to hide, you need to fight. There's a lot of different ways to get away from the reckoner, but there's this figure Dufour. You learn a little bit about your origins, the origins of some of the other characters in it. There's a lot of really, really interesting lore in it, in addition to it just being a very intense experience. So it's one I highly recommend if you're interested in the world of Cultist Simulator or the Book of Hours, the Secret History setting. It is a really special special one to try out. Okay, so we were talking a bit about how I was sort of at odds about whether or not I wanted to use the Edicts Inviolable to get to the Long Tower with Reverend Timothy. I feel reasonably comfortable doing that. But we now have Snow, and Snow is going to give me 3 Sky and 3 Winter. Now, I don't think there are any hirelings that aren't Mr. Kill that give me Winter. So, like, the Fisherman, I believe, gives 2 Moon and 1 Sky. So, effectively here, I'm looking... Like, so the question I'm really interested in is there a way that I can somehow get 1 more Winter on either a Fisherman or Mrs. Kill to make this happen? And I'm short on... So there's the Mist-Kissed Water, but again, we only have 3 of that right now. If I could just find a normal glass of water, I think we'd be okay. But I think actually, weirdly enough, the glass of water would be up here behind the... Probably wouldn't want any water that was in the town of Regensburg. Never got thirsty in the middle of the night. So this is, like, I always feel a bit bad about these kinds of choices because, you know, in the end, you sort of feel like you could have a more efficient use of your resources, but on the other hand, you know, being able to get something rather than nothing, you know, that's a pretty clear choice. So I think I'm probably just going to have to get over my hang-ups about wastefulness, and we'll probably make Mrs. Kill a disciple of Winter for a little bit. My other alternative is that I would use Lady Ava's Repose. Now, I don't think I have any Winter... Yeah. Actually, come to think of it, that'd be a little harder than I thought. So this is looking more and more attractive. One last thing I'll take a look at and see if there's any kind of special sky. So there's 1 sky area, but I'm not actually that worried about it here, for the simple reason that I can access it through Forge, and of course we already know that we can access Denzel, and if I need, I have access to that metal. So I think I may actually wind up hiring Mrs. Kill twice today. So if I do that, I would use the Arab... Okay, so let's say that the Trist and the Fet... It's only Trist or Fet, actually. So yeah, the question for me is how much do I want to catalog books and how much do I want to open rooms? Because if I use Mrs. Kill twice, one would be to gain access to the... So I would open... Okay, so we get her with Arab. We use Core to bring her up to 3. We would need to use the Storm to bring her up to 5. So that would use the Trist or the Fet. Okay. Yeah, we are on a pretty tight timeline. I think this is still acceptable though. So let's use our Trist with the Baronial Period book. This book was probably written around the time of Hush House's baronial period, roughly the 1500s to 1700s. If I examine it, I can learn more about what knowledge it might contain. We will get Mrs. Kill right away. The other alternative I have is paying up for a somebody in the Sweet Bones, but I don't really think that's. I just don't think that's a good idea. Like, I can basically get all of this for free. So Mrs. Kill's mood always improves when I drop by. If you don't choose a topic, Mrs. Kill will always offer help as a friend. Mrs. Kill stands ready to help. You always cheer me up, she says morosely. So I think we're going to try and get the second floor of the Long Tower. We will talk with her about the weather first. More useful than one might expect, especially in Britain. We will pour out a glass of mist-kissed water, even though it sort of hurts my soul a little bit to do that. Serve appropriately. Pour out. Poured out. I'm pretty sure I can get more of this in Numa. But that assumes I have access to the well. Okay, the Rose of Woznai. So that's a Faust... Well, sorry, it's a Lantern mystery. So that's going to involve some Faust. Definitely running out of room for the two difficult books. So I'll just cram that in there with the Tantris for now. I suppose the time has come in terms of picking how I'm going to spend the rest of the day. I think I'm going to settle for... useful memories. Although I can do that with health. So yeah, I guess the question would be, what else am I going to use the health for? So we'll get the storm using what does not bark. Which means we can use the FET to catalog another book. And if I got it wrong, I still have threepence to get some tasty things in the Sweet Bones. Let's take advantage of the weather while it lasts. A nice drop. I can offer my assistant something to drink. And is there someone en route to Hush House? Lieutenant Arthur Thomas Moore. Hero, pilgrim, traitor. He'll always be a soldier, but never again can he be only a soldier. Now we're going to need to wait a little while with Lieutenant Arthur Thomas Moore, retired, for the simple reason that we're going to be using Mrs. Kill for a lot of things today. All right, deaths and their evasions. This is definitely something in the too difficult pile. I wish I had a little more space. Oh no, this is Mist-Kissed Water too. Okay. So I'll just put that in my inventory for now. I do need to find a better place for all of these things. Yeah, once we're done talking with Mrs. Kill, we will help our friend here down to the Grushians. Okay, so first of all, the second floor of the Long Tower. Freezing air, even tendrils of fog drift from the tower top. I should probably seek help from someone who knows the local traditions for dealing with restless spirits. Okay, and we can actually afford to get Mrs. Kill right away. She's already, mechanically, she's already locked into opening up the room, so the uniqueness is only affected by someone actually on the board. Mrs. Kill's mood always improves when I drop by. She stands ready to help. You always cheer me up, she says morosely. I too have morose reactions whenever I show up. Okay, so there's the storm. That's going to help us get our 5th heart, and that will slowly put us towards getting the... well, it'll slowly bring us towards cake time. This is really what it comes down to. So everything goes easier with a song. There's a small temptation to talk with Mrs. Kill about memories over the course of the 30 seconds. This is because it won't take that long to recover something at the Sweet Bones. The problem is it's very hard to think of something that is uniquely going, like, that any memory that Mrs. Kill is going to give me that says I absolutely must, renew this element of the soul right now. Most of the things that I need I can get from books, and so it's just merely a question of time. But my assistant and I are both a little merrier, so we'll talk about the storm, and then we will get to work. I can discuss a memory with my assistant. So similar argument, right? Like you could go to the Sweet Bones with a tuppence and I could open the bag of tricks, but what does that really get me? Long Tower, Solomon's quarters, generally reckoned the chilliest room in the house. The Long Tower was usually called the Winter Tower until Julian Cosley, Magus Epistler, reputed Long, dwelt here briefly in the 17th century. Solomon Husher was the second known to sleep in the room. Evidently, they didn't mind the cold. Memories don't last long outside books, but it's made the difference for the day. So, at this point, I think we go straight to the Ruinous Hall. We do still have options in terms of using Mrs. Kill, so we can get her to open up the first floor of the Grand Descent. Or I guess the ground floor of the Grand Descent is the the official name. Actually, she's good for basically all of Grand Descent, so I sort of have that, I can preserve that option for whenever. But one way or the other, this is definitely how I want to spend the time, because again, we get closer to the kitchen bowls and thus closer to cake time. This place was bright and busy once. It can be again, but it'll be grueling work to make it so, not suitable work for a librarian. And we can now have a chat with Lieutenant Arthur Thomas Moore. So he understands Aramaic and Latin. Interestingly enough, he is looking for lantern and edge. Oh, sorry, he also understands Sabazine. So, amusingly enough, even though we now finally have a moon text, he is not interested in moon. So, good day to you. May I come in? If there's an incident card active, you can discuss it or leave the slot empty and offer a consultation. We will talk to him about the affair of the forgivable debt. He will want an edge mystery. So I think Exorcism for Girls is going to be the right answer for that, but we are going to take a minute just to verify it. I have a contract in Kaunas, librarian, for the Reckoner War. Which side? Does it matter? So, one reason I want to take the time to verify this, number one, it's nice to know what I'm dealing with, first of all. So, if I think a certain text is edge and it's not, it's probably good that I know that before committing myself to a permanent action. The other sort of longer-term goal behind that is ideally, for me at least, I like to try and satisfy the requests with the closest book to the number that they're looking for. And there's two reasons for that. One, when they get the book, their aspect goes up by one. So, for instance, when we talk with Lieutenant Arthur Thomas Moore about edge, their edge requirement is going to go up by one. So it's going to go from 3 to 4. Equally importantly is that when you have given them a book, that book gains an aspect related to their their having read it. So you can't give them the same book twice. And what this means is that if you were to go, let's say, in sort of the reverse order, so I start with like an 18 edge text, assuming that they could read it, and then I work my way down to 4, at the same time that their requirements are getting stricter, I'm actually closing myself off of the kinds of text that would satisfy their requirements. So in that sense, I mean, again, it probably doesn't require that much elaboration, but where I can, I try to get as close as I can to the target. And then, but on the other hand, that's not going to be the sort of thing that it's not going to be the sort of thing where I say, okay, I'm just not going to satisfy their request. Obviously, this is a good way of getting a Spintra, and I need that, if nothing else, so that I can learn a language if I can't satisfy the requirement for the book. Reckoners. You shoot them, they go down. They get up. Stolen years soak up a bullet or two, but it's not a new problem. There'll be ways around it. So we will give him the Thurza Blake book. Frankly, librarian, I'm hoping that I don't have to shoot anyone, but if I do, I know what to shoot him with. That's kind of interesting, actually. Part of the exile is finding resources that are effective against Reckoners. So that's a fun little tip of the hat to that particular problem in that DLC. Okay, I think I have a way of reorganizing the library now. So I'll put this here. So bronze spintra for our trouble. Occult treasures are purchased with occult coin, spintra. Bronze spintra usually display the act of shaping on their reverse side. And here we are. Hendrik de Wolf, first Baron Brandkrug, was granted Hush House after the dissolution of St. Brendan's by Old Coppernose, King Henry VIII. In an act of unusual generosity for that tight-fisted king, the grant came with the title of Baron and rights sicut regale, like a king, the quasi-independence traditionally accorded to Marcher lords. Hendrik was clearly determined to live as befitted his new rank, and he expanded the house accordingly to support sufficient staff. So there's a couple of interesting things in this room. More packages for us to open, but there's also a couple of interesting crafting stations which we most likely won't make use of right away, but they are ones that are interesting nonetheless. The Loom. So I don't really know. I'm just trying to think. I guess the telescope was one where I got a chance to talk about this a bit, maybe the projector, but if it's not clear by this point, one of the things that's interesting about the way that crafting works in this game is there's two ways that they sort of restrict the sort of things that you can craft. One will be the aspects that a given crafting station will take. So in the case of the Loom, you can use heart, you can use moth, you can use nectar, and you can use rose. But you couldn't do lantern weaving on its own. You would basically need to have lantern enter in through something that was associated with moth. But on top of that, most crafting stations, possibly all of them, I don't want to say all just because I haven't unlocked all of the rooms yet, but your basic tools are going to be soul, skill, and memory. But the supplementals are quite different for each station. So in the case of warp and weft for the Loom, it's actually quite straightforward. It just takes fabric. We have two instances of three or possibly more. So we've got the warmly colored yarns, which used to live in the Keeper's Lodge. Keeper's Lodge now has a basket of clean laundry. And then if we want, we can actually use the pale mommet as... Oh, my apologies. It is woven. It is not fabric. And this is neat. I haven't actually seen the inert status before. So the pale mommet is... Oh, it's a tool now. Interesting. This is... I read the patch notes, but I didn't actually realize this is what they meant by mommets being a little more useful. In any case, sorry. For some reason I thought that the pale mommet might count as fabric, but it doesn't. So in this case, I think we just have two instances of fabric here. We've got warmly colored yarns, which is grail and heart, and then clean laundry, which is 2 heart. So if I wanted, I could put up to three heart of fabric inside if I so chose. Now the piano's a neat one for a number of reasons. So first of all, I do like the association with sky and music. Makes me feel very Pythagorean, and I had a little bit of an itch to get back to practicing music again, but Book of Hours definitely pushed me over the edge on it, so there's something to be said for that. I do really love trying to guess what the aspects of different instruments are. So they'll always have the sky aspect, but the question would be, you know, do you what's the secondary one? So pianos in particular are interesting because you know, the drums. I think that's a gimme, right? You'd say that one's going to be heart. But if you're making associations with percussion, there might be an argument that actually the piano is a little bit percussion oriented because in the end you have the hammers hitting the strings, right? But as it happens, the piano that you find in the servants' quarters is different from the grand piano that you find. I'm pretty sure the harp has moon aspect. And then you run into an organ, and probably not very surprisingly, the organ has a forge aspect. But again, it can be a little bit of fun, especially if you're musically inclined to see if you have, are you on the same wavelength as the game in terms of what different instruments have different aspects. And just generally, I actually really like the fact that music enters into this game as memories. There's something I think really fun about that. And I don't know, like music is something that accompanies games, but I can't think about as many games that engage with music the same way that it does here. Like, you have like Guitar Hero and things like that. Those are ones where you're sort of playing the fantasy of being in a band. And then, you have other types of rhythm games. You have games like Thumper and such. So it's hard to say that music is irrelevant to those. And yet to see, like, I can remember there was a game called The Secret World, and I remember one of the puzzles inside The Secret World actually involved notes on a piece of music. So if you understood musical notation, you could solve that puzzle. And if you didn't understand musical notation, you needed to find it out. And of course, the drawback is that with a puzzle like that, people just go and they do an internet search, and they've got what they need. And I mean, in the end, you want to make progress in the game. So I don't even fault someone for that. But there is something kind of neat if instead it's an MMO. So if you could get a party together, and one of the skills that somebody in the part is bringing is the fact that they know how to read sheet music, and they can solve that puzzle, that feels like a slightly more satisfying way of doing it. But in the end, I mean, there's no restriction moving you there. But that's an example. It's different from Book of Hours. But I do sometimes feel that the idea of music as more than just a way to stir up the emotions during a particularly dramatic scene, that can be something interesting. Like if you think about the memories, whether you're using them to level up your skills in Book of Hours, or whether you're using it as an input to a greater crafting element, you can get very Dr. Frankenstein with it, right? The organ starts going up and you scream, "It's alive," during the storm, which happens to have sky aspect. You can run with that. But there are other ways of sort of thinking a little bit about using music as part of this great work, particularly if you think of religious practice, right? Most people's images of churches usually involve some form of singing. In fact, some churches have some specific rules about whether or not instruments are permitted as part of worship. So in that sense, there is sort of an interesting sort of history in terms of the role of music in not just religious worship, but just what its role is. Even something like the Republic has extended sections on what purpose music has, maybe even in some cases what the right kind of music that rulers should be listening to. And it feels like very fertile ground for people to engage with. And again, I don't mean to suggest it hasn't been touched on. Even things like bard characters, you have forms of magic in terms of people performing, amazing feats through the power of music. But there's a few different ways in which music enters into Book of Hours that I think is really nice. And so as a result, I definitely wanted to highlight the piano. Okay. So this will be a little trickier to get into. This would be a point where I might be willing to bite the bullet on the mare in the tree. But we have other places we can go. With Denzil as it is, between the mortar and pestle and potential memories, so he starts with 2. The memory would bring him up to 3. The tool would bring him up to 3. The memory would bring him up to 5. And so even something like Grosskragen whiskey would allow us to open up the ruined kitchen. You can tell I'm not fond of the Gods from Nowhere. I know we don't have that much time left, but one of the things I didn't talk about in the digression on the gods from nowhere was there is the interesting question in terms of whether or not, so gods from nowhere are sometimes considered in opposition to the traditional hours, but the hours themselves are not necessarily good things. So like I would not necessarily want to be anywhere near the wolf divided. Even my favorite, the Watchman, isn't exactly known for its mercy. It is known, in fact, for the opposite. But there is just something nasty about the hair in the tree. There's something very uncomfortable about it that makes me reluctant to try and bring in that metal. Okay, so this opens some possibilities. If I could get Mr. Kill, he would give me a sky aspect, but if I hire a fisherman, that will get me up to 4. Ah, shucks. If I had a Faust, this would get me up to 6. So I think this will probably be the decision that I leave for Friday. But so with a fisherman, they start with 1 sky aspect. The astrolabe will bring them up to 2. The hail will bring them up to 5. And then at that point, I need to use an element of the soul, a drink. Basically, I need something else to move them up. Now, an element of the soul, Faust has 2 lantern and 1 sky. So as a consequence, that's a pretty straightforward choice for me to make. The other alternative would be to try and find some kind of a food or beverage which has sky aspect. I mean, I do have the option here of just sort of mousing over, the aspect here. As it happens, I actually don't really think we've got that much to get sky with. I seem to recall that sky was a fairly difficult one to get in terms of drinks. But that's going to be a decision that I make on Friday. So overall, I think we're in good shape. There is a fairly high priority for the ruined kitchen. My other alternative would be to consider the edge aspect. Now, I don't think anything in the Grand Ascent is something I really want to follow up on. Just because, again, we've got, in terms of 4 heart, that's pretty straightforward for us to get. This would be a little more interesting. So if I took the hail... So one way that I could, if I was so inclined, I could get this level of the Grand Ascent. I could combine hail, Arab, and then we add that with the Cucurbit Barrette. And that should give us enough edge to get a step higher. But again, that's an intermediary step to move somewhere else. So... the other alternative, if I don't want to make it to the Ruined Kitchen, and remembering that the Ruined Kitchen gets me access to a heart tool, which of course is very helpful with Mrs. Kill, I do have the option of trying to use the sky aspect of the hail to let me read some of these sky books. So with the hail, we're down to 3 sky. We can combine that with furs and feathers, which would give us 5, and then the astrolabe would give us a 6th. So it's tempting just because, again, we are going to want to read these sky texts at some point, but on the other hand, being able to open that room in particular just gives us a permanent... You can kind of consider it as like a permanent +1 to every heart challenge that we have. And so that's why I think I'm going to be focusing on where I can get this sky aspect from in the Ruined Kitchen. But a consideration for another time. I'm already past the half-hour mark. As always, thank you everybody for watching. I hope you are continuing to enjoy the series, although I know there's been a little bit more discussion in terms of the bigger picture in terms of the game. We'll try and close out tomorrow's episode with at least one more room, and for the remaining tasks, it's really just getting storms of opportunity so that I can read the relevant texts, and then cataloging the remaining text. I kind of had a halting effort to make a too difficult room, but I stopped because I wanted to talk. Anyways, have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you in the next one.